The morning in Cedarfield had a deceptive softness to it. Sunlight poured through the lace curtains of Rose Whitmore's kitchen, spreading a golden calm across the wooden floor. The air smelled of peppermint tea and clean linens, the scent of a life lived quietly. It should have been the picture of peace, but nothing about that morning was peaceful. When Emily Carter leaned down to help her grandmother pick up a dropped spoon, she froze. There, on Rose's thin wrist, beneath the soft fabric of her pale blue cardigan, were bruises. Not the faded yellow of an old bump, but the deep, fresh violet of something that had just happened. Emily's heart stopped for a second, her breath catching in her throat. The marks looked too deliberate, almost like the shape of fingers. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What happened to your arm?" Rose looked down as if she had forgotten her own body. For a moment she seemed confused. Then she smiled with that gentle, tired grace Emily had known all her life. "Oh, this! I must have bumped it on the cupboard again. You know me, always clumsy." The words were meant to sound light, but her hand shook as she reached for her teacup. A drop of hot tea spilled onto her knuckles. She flinched, just barely. Emily frowned. Her grandmother had always been careful, graceful, even in her old age. A woman who had worked 30 years as a school librarian, who kept her books in perfect order, her garden blooming like a watercolor painting. Rose Whitmore was many things, but clumsy was not one of them. "Are you sure?" Emily pressed. "It looks like it hurts." "Don't make a fuss, dear." Rose forced a little laugh and tucked her hand under the table. "When you get to my age, things like this just happen." Emily studied her grandmother's face. The smile didn't reach her eyes. It wasn't just the bruise. It was the way Rose avoided her gaze, the way her shoulders stayed tight, as though bracing for something unseen. Emily noticed the silver bracelet on her wrist, the one Rose had worn every day since her husband Henry passed away 15 years earlier. It had always been a perfect circle, engraved with his initials. Now, the metal was bent slightly out of shape. "Grandma, did someone—" Emily began, but Rose cut her off sharply. "No one did anything. Please, Emily." Her tone was firm enough to make the younger woman hesitate. Then it softened. "Let's not turn a small thing into a storm." The kettle whistled behind them. Rose turned her back, busying herself with the tea. Emily stood there, watching the tremor in her grandmother's hand as she poured. The kitchen light flickered slightly, glinting off the bracelet that had once symbolized safety and love. Something about that sight unsettled her deeply. They sat together at the kitchen table, trying to talk about normal things, the weather, the upcoming town fair, the neighbor's new dog. But the silence between sentences grew heavier, like fog settling in. Emily noticed other details she had missed before. The cabinet corner near the sink had a dent. The hallway rug was slightly misaligned, as if it had been dragged. Her grandmother reached for the sugar bowl, and the sleeve of her cardigan slipped back again. Another bruise, higher up. This one was darker. Emily's throat tightened. "Grandma, how did that one happen?" Rose's smile faltered. She pulled her sleeve down quickly and shook her head. "I told you, I'm fine. You worry too much." Emily didn't respond. Her instincts, sharpened by years in investigative journalism, were screaming. She had written about elder abuse before, about families that turned cruel when money or inheritance was involved. She had interviewed victims who said things like it was an accident or he didn't mean it, always spoken with that same forced calm her grandmother was using now. But this was not an article. This was blood. This was family. Rose stood to wash her cup. As she reached for the sink, the silver bracelet slid down her wrist and clinked softly against the counter. Emily watched it fall to the floor. When Rose bent to pick it up, Emily saw the faint tremor in her knees, the quiet exhaustion in her movements. "Let me get that," Emily said quickly, but Rose waved her off. "I can manage," she replied, her voice trembling just enough to betray her. The bracelet slipped through her fingers and hit the tiles again, a small metallic sound that felt strangely final. That was when Emily saw it. A fresh bruise forming near the elbow, the shape so distinct it could have been the imprint of someone's grasp. Her pulse roared in her ears. This was no accident. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. "Grandma, please tell me the truth. Did someone hurt you?" For a moment, Rose didn't answer. She stood perfectly still, her back to Emily. Then she said so quietly that the words nearly disappeared into the hum of the refrigerator, "Don't ask questions you don't want the answers to." Emily froze. The tone wasn't defensive. It was afraid. Rose turned, her eyes glistening but dry, like someone who had already cried too much to cry again. "Promise me, Emily," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "You won't worry about me. Promise you'll focus on your work. That's what your mother would have wanted." At the mention of her mother, Emily's chest constricted. She remembered another set of bruises, another woman who had smiled through the pain. She remembered finding her mother's note the day before the funeral. "Don't let it happen to anyone else." No, she couldn't promise that. She reached out, gently taking her grandmother's hand. "I can't ignore this, Grandma. You raised me to fight for what's right." Rose looked away, the sunlight reflecting in her tears. "Then fight for yourself, dear. Not for me." Emily left the house that afternoon with her mind spinning. The town of Cedarfield looked the same as always. Quiet streets lined with maple trees, neighbors walking their dogs, a bakery window fogged with warmth. But everything felt different. The peace felt artificial now, like a painted backdrop behind which something dangerous was hiding. She sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel, unable to start the engine. The image of her grandmother's arm wouldn't leave her mind. The bruises, the bent bracelet, the broken mug she had glimpsed in the trash bin on her way out. A piece of it had a dark smear along the edge. Something was happening inside that house, something her grandmother was too afraid to name. By the time she drove away, Emily had made up her mind. Tomorrow she would go back, not as a granddaughter making a casual visit, but as a journalist, as someone who could no longer look the other way. She would find out who was hurting Rose Whitmore, and she would stop them, before the truth destroyed what little peace they had left. You are watching Grandma's Final Chapter, a channel dedicated to powerful stories that remind us how important it is to protect and cherish our elders. Every day we share tales of courage, love, and the quiet strength that keeps families together. If this story moved something in your heart, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're watching from. Together we can build a community where aging means safety, dignity, and independence for every grandparent who still has a story to tell. That night, Emily sat in her small apartment above Main Street, the kind of place that always smelled faintly of ink and coffee. Her desk was littered with files, photographs, and half-drunk mugs of tea. Usually, that clutter felt comforting, proof that she was still chasing the truth somewhere in the world. But tonight it felt different. Every sound from outside, every creak in the ceiling, reminded her of her grandmother's trembling hands and the shape of those bruises. She tried to write her notes, as she always did after a day in the field. Cedarfield, Rose Whitmore, possible neglect or abuse, unknown suspect. But her fingers froze over the keyboard. This wasn't just another name in a file. It was her blood, her history, the woman who had raised her when no one else would. Emily's reflection stared back at her from the darkened window. The outline of her face looked almost unfamiliar, harder somehow. There were traces of her mother there too, the same hazel eyes, the same determined jawline. She swallowed hard. Her mother, Laura Carter, had died when Emily was 17. The cause had been labeled accidental, but Emily had always known better. Her stepfather's anger, the shouting, the bruises hidden under long sleeves. She had seen it all, and she had done nothing soon enough. That guilt had followed her for 15 years. It had driven her into journalism, into a life built around exposing the cruelty people preferred to hide. Every story she published was a small act of penance, a whispered apology to the memory of her mother. But now it felt as if life had come full circle. The same fear, the same silence. Only this time, the victim was her grandmother, and Emily refused to fail again. She opened her drawer and took out an old photograph, worn around the edges. It showed Rose and Henry Whitmore sitting on their porch, young and in love. Henry's arm was around her shoulders, and the sunlight reflected off the silver bracelet he had clasped around her wrist that day. It was the same one Rose still wore, a circle of love that had lasted long after he was gone. Emily held the photo to her chest. "I'll protect her, Grandpa," she whispered. Outside, the wind picked up, shaking the maple branches against her window. The sound reminded her of the rocking chair in Rose's living room, that slow creak of wood that had been the background music of her childhood. Every summer, she used to sit on the rug while her grandmother read letters aloud, old letters from Henry written during his years in the Navy. His words always began with "My dearest Rose" and ended with "Keep the kettle warm for me." That memory should have brought comfort, but tonight it only deepened the ache in Emily's chest. That chair, once a symbol of peace, now seemed to hold a secret. The next morning, Emily returned to Rose's cottage. The air outside was crisp, the sky heavy with clouds. She knocked twice before letting herself in. "Grandma?" she called softly. "In here, dear," came the reply. Rose was in her usual place, sitting in the rocking chair, a folded letter resting on her lap. She looked so small against the high back of the seat. The silver bracelet glinted weakly in the morning light. Emily noticed that her hands were clasped tightly together, her knuckles pale. "What's that?" Emily asked, nodding toward the letter. Rose smiled faintly. "An old one. Your grandfather wrote it from the Atlantic on his way home. I found it between some books yesterday. It made me feel young again." She handed it to Emily, who scanned the faded handwriting. The words were full of tenderness, full of a man's quiet devotion. "If the house feels empty, remember that love fills the spaces where silence tries to grow." Emily's throat tightened. "He really loved you." Rose nodded. "He did. That's why I still make peppermint tea every morning. He used to say the smell reminded him of home." Emily followed her grandmother's gaze to the cup of tea steaming on the side table. The scent filled the room, sweet and calming. But beneath it lingered something else, faint but sharp, antiseptic. The same smell she had noticed the day before. Her journalist's instinct started to stir again. "Has someone been cleaning for you? The house smells different." "Linda brought some stronger cleaner," Rose said quickly. "She thought it might help with the mildew in the bathroom." Emily nodded, pretending to accept the explanation. But her mind was already cataloging every detail: the letter, the rocking chair, the tea, the smell. She reached down and picked up the bracelet that had slipped from Rose's wrist. The metal was colder than it should have been. "I think you should let me have this cleaned," she said gently. Rose hesitated. "No. That stays with me." Emily placed it back carefully, feeling the faint tremor in her grandmother's hand. "All right. But you'll tell me if anything happens again?" Rose looked away. "There's nothing to tell." That same wall of silence again, the same fear that spoke louder than words. By the time Emily left the house, her decision was already made. She couldn't rely on conversations or guesses. She needed proof, something undeniable, something that would show the truth when her grandmother could not speak it. That evening, she sat at her kitchen table, staring at the small box that held the security camera she had purchased months ago for an unfinished story. It was a simple device, no larger than a pocket mirror, motion-sensitive, silent. She remembered the ethics debate she'd once had with her editor about privacy and consent. "You never film family," he had said. "That line is sacred." But the bruises on Rose's skin didn't feel sacred. They felt like a cry for help. Her hands trembled as she opened the box. She rehearsed her reasoning again in her mind. This wasn't betrayal. It was protection. If she was wrong, no one would ever know. If she was right, it could save her grandmother's life. The following night, Emily returned to Cedarfield under the pretense of bringing groceries. Rose was already in her nightgown, brushing her silver hair in front of the mirror. "I didn't expect you today," she said with a small smile. "You must be tired." "I just wanted to check on you," Emily replied, setting the grocery bag on the counter. "I bought your favorite tea." While Rose went to the living room, Emily unpacked the bag slowly. She could hear the familiar creak of the rocking chair, the gentle hum of her grandmother's voice as she murmured something to herself. Emily slipped the small camera out of her pocket and looked around. The wall clock above the fireplace was old and ornate, carved with flowers and small birds. It had a perfect ledge just beneath the dial. She climbed onto a chair, carefully opened the back, and placed the device inside, facing the living room. From that angle, it could see everything: the chair, the doorway, even the hall that led to the bedrooms. When she stepped down, her heart was pounding. "Everything all right in there?" Rose called. "Just fixing the clock," Emily answered, forcing cheer into her voice. "It was a little crooked." Rose laughed softly. "Your grandfather could never keep that thing level either." Emily smiled faintly and joined her grandmother for tea. The warmth of the cup felt heavy in her hands, the scent of peppermint wrapping around her like memory and guilt combined. Rose sipped quietly, unaware of the small blinking light hidden behind the carved wood. They sat together in silence, 2 generations separated by secrets neither could bear to voice. That night, when Emily drove home through the sleeping town, she couldn't stop replaying her grandmother's words. "Don't ask questions you don't want the answers to." Tomorrow, she thought, I will have the answers whether I want them or not. The next few days passed like slow-moving fog. Cedarfield's October wind pressed against the windows of Rose Whitmore's cottage, carrying the faint rustle of dry leaves and the whistle of branches brushing against the roof. To anyone walking by, the house looked peaceful. Smoke rising from the chimney, lace curtains drawn, the warm glow of lamplight behind glass. Inside, however, the air felt heavy, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Emily arrived that Thursday afternoon with a basket of groceries and a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. When Linda Hayes opened the door, Emily's first thought was that the woman looked like someone who wanted to disappear. Linda was in her early 50s, with soft brown hair tied neatly back and a polite voice that seemed always on the edge of whispering. She greeted Emily warmly enough, but there was something guarded about her eyes. "Good afternoon, Miss Carter," she said, stepping aside. "Mrs. Whitmore is resting in the sitting room." Emily thanked her and stepped inside. The smell hit her first. Beneath the familiar notes of peppermint tea lingered a sharper odor, faint but unmistakable, cleaning fluid mixed with something metallic, the kind of scent that belonged in hospitals, not homes. The living room looked unchanged, the rocking chair by the window, the bookshelf lined with old novels, the silver picture frame of Rose and Henry on their wedding day. Yet Emily sensed a shift she couldn't explain. The space felt colder, as if the warmth had been drained from the walls. "Linda," Emily began casually, "how long have you been helping my grandmother?" Linda wiped her hands on her apron. "A few months now. Your grandmother's very kind. We've found a nice rhythm together." "Has she been doing all right lately? Any falls or health issues I should know about?" Linda hesitated, her gaze flicking briefly toward the hallway. "Nothing serious. She tires easily, that's all. Age does that." Emily studied her for a moment. The woman's posture was calm, but her fingers kept adjusting the edge of her apron, folding and unfolding the fabric. It was a nervous habit. "I see," Emily said softly. "If there's ever anything unusual, you can tell me directly. My grandmother may act strong, but she hides things." Linda smiled faintly. "She loves you very much. You remind her of your mother." The mention of her mother made Emily's chest tighten. She nodded once and walked toward the living room. Rose was sitting in her rocking chair, her silver hair brushed neatly, a blanket across her knees. The late afternoon light fell across her face, soft but unforgiving. She looked up at Emily and smiled, but her eyes seemed tired. "Emily, sweetheart," she said, "you didn't have to come all this way." "I wanted to," Emily replied, kneeling beside her. "How are you feeling today?" "Better. Linda's been taking good care of me." Linda appeared in the doorway, smiling politely, then disappeared again toward the kitchen. Emily could hear the faint clatter of dishes, the slow rhythm of running water. She reached for her grandmother's hand. "You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you?" Rose looked out the window instead of answering. "Do you remember the old oak tree by the river?" she asked suddenly. "The one you used to climb as a little girl?" Emily blinked. "Of course. You used to sit at the base and read while I got sap in my hair." Rose chuckled softly. "Your grandfather planted that tree when I was pregnant with your mother. He said every branch that grew would carry part of our story." Her voice drifted off, her gaze still fixed on something far away. Emily followed her eyes to the window. The wind had picked up again, making the curtains ripple like restless ghosts. She wanted to ask about the bruises, about the nights when the house seemed to hold more shadows than light. But every time she looked at her grandmother's fragile face, her courage faltered. Instead, she sat there, feeling the ticking of the clock echo through her chest. After a while, Rose began to nod off in her chair. Her breathing steadied, her fingers loosening around the blanket. Emily stayed beside her, letting the quiet fill the room. The smell of peppermint tea grew stronger. In that moment, Emily remembered the camera hidden inside the wall clock above the fireplace. It was watching everything silently, capturing what words could not. When she finally stood to leave, Linda appeared again, drying her hands on a towel. "She rests better after tea," she said. "Yes," Emily answered, studying the woman's face. "You make it for her every evening?" "Every evening," Linda confirmed. "She likes it with 2 sugars." Emily forced a smile and walked out into the hallway. The camera's tiny light was invisible from this angle, but she could feel it there, humming quietly behind the carved wooden face of the clock. Later that night, the wind rose to a howl outside. Emily had gone home to her apartment, but sleep refused to come. She replayed every detail in her mind. The smell, the bruises, Linda's eyes, her grandmother's strange calm. Something was building, she could feel it. Something waiting to be seen. She woke suddenly around midnight, her phone buzzing beside her bed. It was the motion alert from the camera. She sat up, her pulse hammering, and opened the app. The grainy black and white image of the living room appeared on her screen. At first, nothing seemed out of place. The clock ticked softly in the corner. The blanket on the rocking chair moved with the rhythm of Rose's breathing. Then Rose stirred, sitting up slightly. Her lips moved, her eyes half open. Emily turned up the volume. The voice came through faint and broken, like a whisper carried by wind. Don't sign." Emily froze. Rose shifted again, her face twisting with fear even in sleep. "Please, Henry, not the papers. Please." Her voice cracked on the last word. Emily's hands were trembling. She watched for another minute, but her grandmother settled again into uneasy sleep. The room went still, the only sound the faint hum of the heater and the rattle of the window pane. The words echoed in her mind. "Don't sign. Papers. What papers?" She sat back on her bed, staring at the phone screen long after the image went dark. Her thoughts spiraled through every possibility. Had someone been pressuring Rose? Was Linda involved? Or was her grandmother reliving some memory from years ago, calling out to a husband long gone? The fear that crept through Emily's body was familiar, but deeper this time. It wasn't the kind of fear that made you run. It was the kind that rooted you in place, that whispered of secrets you could not yet see. Outside, the wind battered the windows of her apartment. She reached for her notebook, scrawling a single line across the top of a clean page. What is Rose Whitmore being forced to sign? The peppermint tea, the antiseptic smell, the bent bracelet, the dream. Each detail lined up in her mind like pieces of a puzzle whose image was beginning to form. Emily set her pen down, her decision clear. She would go back to the house the next morning and review the footage properly. Whatever was happening beneath that roof, she would uncover it. No more silence. No more pretending not to see. In Cedarfield, beneath the peaceful hum of small-town life, something dark was unfolding, and Emily Carter was done waiting for it to reveal itself. 3 nights later, the camera caught movement. The house in Cedarfield was dark, except for the faint glow of a lamp in the hallway. The clock on the mantelpiece showed 12:47 a.m. Rose Whitmore's figure could be seen sitting in her rocking chair, a blanket wrapped tightly around her legs. The rest of the room was still, like a painting of silence. Then, the door opened. A tall man stepped inside, his movements sharp and purposeful. His coat was heavy with rain, and as he closed the door behind him, droplets slid down onto the floorboards. Emily recognized him instantly. Mark Whitmore, her uncle, her mother's brother, the son who had vanished from family gatherings years ago, who had stopped calling after Henry's funeral. Her blood ran cold. From the video feed, Emily could see Rose's body tense. The old woman didn't scream, didn't even flinch outwardly, but her hands gripped the arms of her chair as if bracing for impact. "Mark," she said, her voice fragile. "What are you doing here at this hour?" Mark stepped forward, his expression hard. He placed a stack of papers on the table beside her. "I came to talk about what should have been settled years ago." "What are those?" Rose asked quietly. "Documents," he replied. "Transfer of property. This house, it needs to be in my name before things get complicated." Rose's eyes widened. "Your father built this house for us, for our family. It is already yours in memory." Mark laughed without humor. "Memory doesn't pay taxes, Mother. You don't need all this space. You're getting old. You should be somewhere smaller, safer. I can sell this place, handle the money, make sure you're taken care of." "I am taken care of," Rose said softly. "I have everything I need right here." Mark's voice rose, breaking the stillness. "Stop pretending. You sit here clinging to the past while this place rots. You don't even realize how much value is being wasted." Rose's chin trembled, but her voice held. "Value is not measured in dollars, Mark. It's measured in what we shared here, in what your father left behind." Mark slammed his hand on the table, making the papers scatter. "Enough of this nonsense. Just sign them." Rose flinched. "No." The word was small but absolute. Mark took a step closer, his shadow stretching across her lap. "Do not make this harder than it has to be. I am trying to help you." "Help me?" Rose's voice broke. "By taking the only thing I have left?" He reached for her wrist. "You will sign them." The sound of the impact was soft but unmistakable. His hand closed too tightly around her fragile arm. The bracelet that had once been a symbol of love slipped loose and hit the floor, spinning once before it settled against the wood. Rose gasped. "Mark, please." "Let go." "You're being ridiculous," he snapped. "You always favored Laura, and now her daughter is trying to meddle too. Don't make me regret coming here tonight." Tears welled in Rose's eyes. If Laura were alive, she would be ashamed of you. For a moment, the air itself seemed to freeze. Mark's face hardened, then twisted into something almost unrecognizable. He stepped back, grabbed the papers from the table, and thrust them toward her again. "Sign, or you will regret it." When she did not reach for the pen, he turned abruptly and stormed out of the frame. The door slammed shut behind him, rattling the picture frames on the wall. On the video, Rose sat there in silence, her body trembling. She looked down at the bracelet on the floor, reached for it with shaking hands, and pressed it against her chest. Emily watched the recording in her apartment, her hand covering her mouth. She had stopped breathing halfway through. Now tears blurred the screen. Her body trembled from head to toe as her mind replayed the image again and again. Her uncle, her own blood. The man her mother used to call the good son. She hit pause, then rewind, and watched the moment the bracelet fell. The sound of it hitting the floor was faint, but it echoed in her ears like a bell tolling for everything she thought she knew about her family. Emily felt her stomach twist. She could hear her grandmother's voice from that night, caught faintly in the recording's background. "Don't sign." Those words had not been a dream. They had been a warning. She played the video one more time, her fingers clenched around her phone. Every frame revealed something new. The fear in Rose's eyes, the desperation in Mark's voice, the tension of years of silence breaking open. When it ended, Emily sat there in the dark, shaking. Her first instinct was to call the police. Her second was to call her grandmother. But she knew Rose would deny everything. That was who she was, the protector, even of those who hurt her. Emily stood up, pacing the small apartment. She tried to make sense of it. Mark's sudden return, the documents, the way Linda had avoided eye contact. Was Linda part of this? Did she know what was happening? Her thoughts raced until they collided with one simple truth. She could not stay silent anymore. She opened her laptop and uploaded the footage to an external drive, labeling it Evidence, Rose Whitmore Case. Then she copied it to another drive and slipped it into her purse. Her hands still trembled, but her purpose was clear. She would confront this, not as a frightened niece, but as a journalist who had spent her life exposing cruelty. The following morning, she drove back to the cottage. The air was heavy with mist, the kind that blurred the edges of the road. When she parked by the gate, she saw Linda sweeping the porch, her face unreadable. "Good morning, Miss Carter," Linda said. "Morning," Emily replied, her voice even but tight. "Is my grandmother awake?" "She's still resting," Linda said, lowering her eyes. "I need to see her," Emily replied firmly. Inside, Rose was sitting in her chair, staring at the bracelet now fixed around her wrist. When she saw Emily, her expression softened, then faltered. "You shouldn't have come so early, dear." "I saw him," Emily said quietly. Rose's breath caught. "Saw who?" "Uncle Mark, on the camera." Rose's hands went still. The color drained from her face. "Grandma, he tried to make you sign something. He hurt you." Tears filled Rose's eyes, but she said nothing. Her silence was confirmation enough. "Why didn't you tell me?" Emily asked, her voice breaking. "Why let him come here at all?" Rose shook her head slowly. "He's my son." "That doesn't give him the right to do this," Emily said, kneeling beside her. "You don't have to protect him." But Rose looked away, her voice trembling. "You don't understand. Family holds even when it breaks." Emily took her grandmother's hand gently. "Not this time. This ends now." In that moment, the quiet of the house felt unbearable. The peppermint scent that once symbolized comfort now seemed to coat the air with unease. The walls felt smaller, the shadows deeper. Emily glanced at the clock on the mantel, its carved wooden flowers hiding the truth inside. That tiny lens had seen everything, and soon others would too. She looked back at her grandmother, whose eyes glistened with both fear and relief. "He cannot come back here," Emily said softly. Rose nodded, tears spilling over her cheeks. "Please be careful," she whispered. "He's not the boy I raised." Emily reached up, straightened the silver bracelet on her grandmother's wrist, and gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "Neither am I," she said quietly. "I'm not the girl who stays silent anymore." Outside, the wind carried the sound of the church bell from town. It was almost poetic, Emily thought, that truth always seemed to arrive in the darkest hours. Tonight, she had seen what was hidden, and tomorrow, she would make sure the world saw it too. The following morning, Cedarfield was covered in a pale mist that seemed to drain the world of color. Emily drove in silence, her fingers clenched around the steering wheel. The flash drive with the video sat on the seat beside her, sealed inside a small brown envelope. Each mile toward Maple County Police Headquarters felt heavier than the last. She had spent the night replaying the footage again and again, as though a clearer version might make it easier to accept. It didn't. Her uncle's voice still echoed in her mind, commanding and cruel. Her grandmother's trembling defiance still made her chest ache. This wasn't just a family problem anymore, it was a crime. The police station stood at the edge of town, a square brick building with peeling paint and a flag that barely fluttered in the damp morning air. Emily parked her car, took a deep breath, and walked inside. The lobby smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. A tired-looking officer behind the front desk glanced up. "Can I help you?" "I need to speak to Detective Robert Mason," she said, trying to steady her voice. "It's about a case of elder abuse." The officer frowned slightly, then nodded. "Detective Mason heads the Elder Protection Unit. Have a seat." Emily waited on a hard plastic chair beneath a bulletin board filled with missing person flyers and public safety posters. Her reflection in the glass door looked pale, almost ghostly. She tried to calm herself by focusing on her breathing. She reminded herself that this was what she did for a living, finding truth, giving voice to the silenced. But it was different when the silence belonged to her own blood. After a few minutes, a tall man in his late 40s appeared from the hallway. His presence carried the kind of quiet authority that came from years of witnessing both suffering and endurance. "Ms. Carter?" he asked. "Yes, thank you for seeing me." "I'm Detective Mason," he said, offering his hand. "Let's step into my office." The room was small but tidy, lined with filing cabinets and stacks of case folders. A framed photograph of an elderly woman sat on his desk. Emily noticed it immediately. It gave her the faint comfort of knowing he might understand what this meant. "So," Mason began, sitting down across from her, "you said this concerns elder abuse?" Emily nodded, placing the envelope on the desk. "This is evidence. My grandmother, Rose Whitmore, has been threatened and physically coerced by her son, my uncle Mark Whitmore. He tried to force her to sign over her house. I installed a camera in her living room after noticing signs of injury." This video shows everything. Mason studied her for a moment, then reached for the envelope. "You did the right thing bringing it here." He inserted the drive into his computer. The room fell into silence except for the faint buzz of the monitor. The video played. Mark's voice filled the room, angry and raw. The footage showed him gripping Rose's wrist, the silver bracelet slipping from her arm and clattering onto the floor. Her refusal. His shouting. The moment he stormed out, Emily's throat tightened as she watched it again. Mason leaned forward, pausing at key frames, making notes. When it ended, he sat back, exhaling slowly. "This," he said, "is abuse and coercion. There's no ambiguity here." He tried to obtain property through intimidation. Under state law, that's both elder abuse and financial exploitation. He turned toward her, his expression softening. "Your grandmother will need immediate protection. We'll issue an emergency safety order and assign an officer to check in daily until this is resolved." Relief flooded Emily's chest so suddenly that her eyes stung. "Thank you," she whispered. Mason nodded. "You said there's a caregiver involved?" "Yes, Linda Hayes. I don't know if she's part of it, but she's been in the house during most of his visits. My grandmother always defends her, but something doesn't feel right." Mason opened a new file. "We'll bring her in for questioning." By the time Emily returned to her car, the mist had lifted, revealing a hard blue sky. The sunlight hit the windshield and made her squint. For the first time in days, she felt something close to hope. That afternoon, Mason called. "Miss Carter," he said, "we've interviewed Linda Hayes. You might want to come in." When Emily arrived, Linda was sitting in the interview room, her face pale and streaked with tears. Mason gestured for Emily to wait by the door. "She's agreed to make a full statement," he said quietly. Linda's voice was thin and shaking. "I never wanted to hurt her. Mr. Whitmore paid me to keep quiet. He said it was just about family paperwork, nothing serious. But then, when I saw the bruises, I wanted to quit. He said if I told anyone, he'd ruin me." Her sobs filled the small room. "I should have said something. She didn't deserve that." Emily's heart twisted. "You could have helped her," she said softly. "I know," Linda whispered. "I'm sorry." Detective Mason recorded the statement, then handed Emily a small, sealed envelope. "This was recovered from your grandmother's house," he said. Inside was the silver bracelet. It had been placed inside an evidence bag, labeled with case details and the date of collection. Emily held it in her hands for a long moment. The cold metal reflected the fluorescent light, dull yet somehow dignified. It wasn't just proof of what had happened. It was history, A circle of love that had survived betrayal. Mason cleared his throat. Will proceed with charges against Mark Whitmore for elder abuse, physical coercion, and attempted fraud. You did the right thing, Miss Carter. You probably saved your grandmother's life. Emily nodded, her voice low. I didn't do it just to save her. I want to make sure this doesn't keep happening to others. How many families lose someone before anyone notices? Mason gave her a long look. More than you'd think, but most don't have someone brave enough to stand up for them. That night, Emily visited Rose in a temporary care facility where she had been moved for safety. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of a heater. Rose sat in bed, her frail hands folded together. When she saw Emily, she smiled faintly. They told me you went to the police, she said. I did, Emily replied, sitting beside her. You're safe now. They have everything they need. Rose looked toward the window where the early evening light was fading. Your grandfather would be proud of you, she said softly. He always said truth has its own kind of mercy. Emily took her grandmother's hand. It's not over yet, Grandma. There are too many people like you, isolated, manipulated, invisible. I can't let that continue. Rose squeezed her fingers weakly. You always were the stubborn one. Maybe, Emily said with a small smile. But this time, I'm not backing down. Later, as she walked down the sterile hallway, Emily passed a bulletin board covered with pamphlets about elder safety, support hotlines, and advocacy networks. She stopped, reading the words aloud quietly to herself. If you suspect abuse, speak. Silence protects the wrong side. Outside, the night had grown colder. Emily looked up at the faint stars, her reflection visible in the glass doors of the facility. She thought of the silver bracelet, now sealed away in an evidence room, both proof and memory. It wasn't just her grandmother's story anymore. It was a symptom of something larger, a world too ready to forget those who had once built it, and she was determined to make them remember. Tomorrow, she would not return to the police station as a victim's granddaughter. She would return as a journalist. The headline was already forming in her mind. Elder abuse in Maple County, the silent epidemic behind closed doors. The fight for her grandmother's justice was only the beginning. For a few days, it felt like the storm had finally broken. The police had taken the footage, Mark was under investigation, and Rose was safe at the care facility. Emily allowed herself to breathe again, even if every breath still carried the weight of fear. But peace in Cedarfield never lasted long. It started with a text message, short, cold, and anonymous. Withdraw the complaint, or she will regret it. Emily froze when she read it. The words pulsed on the screen like a heartbeat, simple yet venomous. She stared at them for several seconds before the meaning fully sank in. She meant her grandmother. Her first thought was that it might be a cruel prank, but the timing was too precise. Only a handful of people knew about the complaint, and fewer still had something to lose because of it. She forwarded the message to Detective Mason. Within minutes, he called. Emily, don't delete that message, he instructed. Keep your phone on you at all times. We'll send a patrol unit to monitor your house tonight. She wanted to thank him, but the words wouldn't come. Her throat felt dry, as if every sound had been stripped from her. That night, the wind rattled the shutters. Emily sat by the kitchen window, staring out into the yard. Beyond the gate, a set of headlights appeared, lingering just long enough to be noticed. Then the car turned off its lights, its shape swallowed by the dark. She leaned closer to the window, her breath fogging the glass. You see it too, don't you? She whispered to herself. The peppermint tea on the counter had gone cold, untouched since sunset. When the clock struck midnight, the doorbell rang. Once, then again. She stood motionless, her pulse hammering in her ears. Through the peephole, she saw no one, just the empty porch, the faint sway of the wind chime her grandmother had hung years ago. Its soft, metallic tone seemed almost mocking now. The next morning, Detective Mason sent a team to install additional cameras around the property. One at the front gate, another by the side entrance, and 2 near the back porch. "Whoever sent that message wants to intimidate you," he said firmly. "We're not going to let that happen." Emily nodded. Though exhaustion weighed on her like a second skin, she hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mark's shadow in her grandmother's living room, his hand gripping her wrist. She kept seeing the silver bracelet falling to the floor, spinning before it stilled. That night, she made herself a fresh cup of peppermint tea and sat by the window again. The steam curled upward, carrying its familiar scent of warmth and memory. Her grandmother used to say it calmed the soul. But tonight it felt like a fragile shield against something vast and invisible. Outside, the porch light flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. Emily's reflection in the glass looked pale and ghost-like. Behind her, the wall clock ticked softly, a reminder of the hidden camera that had started all of this. She felt both gratitude and guilt every time she heard it. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. "You think you can win this? You don't know who you're dealing with." Her hands shook as she took a screenshot and sent it to Mason. His reply came almost instantly. "We're tracking the number. Stay inside. Lock the doors." Emily did as told, double-checking each latch and window. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock. She sat back down, clutching the warm mug, her eyes fixed on the faint movement of the shadows outside. Hours passed. The tea grew cold again. She barely noticed. At dawn, she drifted into a shallow sleep on the couch, only to be startled awake by the sound of her phone buzzing again. This time, it was Mason. "Emily," he said, his voice urgent. "You need to come to the station. We found something." When she arrived, Mason motioned her into his office. The blinds were drawn, the light dim. On his desk was a laptop showing footage from the surveillance cameras installed around her house. "Look at this," he said, pressing play. The video began at 2:14 a.m. The street outside her gate was empty, except for the faint outline of a parked car. 2 figures appeared, moving cautiously toward the property. One wore a hooded sweatshirt. The other carried something in his hand that caught the light. "They stayed there for almost 20 minutes, Mason said quietly. "Didn't approach the door, didn't vandalize anything, just watched." Emily leaned closer. "Who are they?" Mason paused the video and zoomed in on the frame where one of the figures turned his head slightly toward the camera. The image was grainy, but the face was clear enough to recognize. Emily's breath caught. It was Tyler Whitmore, Mark's oldest son. The second figure, taller and leaner, was his younger brother, Jason, her cousins. Mason clicked to another clip, this one from the camera at the back of the house. The 2 men were speaking to someone just beyond the fence. The angle only caught part of the third person's silhouette, but it was enough to confirm what Emily already suspected. "They hired someone," Mason said grimly. "A private contractor. Likely to keep watch on you and pressure you into dropping the case. We're pulling financial records now, but we already have grounds to charge them with harassment and witness intimidation." Emily felt her stomach twist. "They're following me? My own family?" Mason's eyes softened. "Greed makes people desperate. They're afraid of losing the house and the inheritance tied to it. You did the right thing coming forward." Emily stared at the frozen image on the screen. Her cousins' faces, half lit by the faint streetlight, looked older than she remembered, hardened by anger and fear. They had been boys once, laughing, carefree, chasing fireflies in this same town. How had it come to this? Her voice trembled when she spoke. "They think I'll back down." "Will you?" Mason asked quietly. Emily lifted her gaze. "No, not this time." That night, back at her apartment, she placed the evidence envelope on the table beside her cup of tea. The silver bracelet gleamed faintly through the transparent plastic, catching the light from the lamp. It reminded her of the strength that had held her family together long before greed began to tear it apart. She opened her notebook and began to write. the words flowing like defiance on the page. The abuse of the elderly is not just a family tragedy, it is a national shame. Behind closed doors, countless voices are silenced, not by death, but by fear. She stopped and looked out the window. The street was empty again, but she knew better now. The silence outside was not peace. It was waiting. She took a slow sip of her tea, letting the mint sting her tongue. Somewhere deep inside her, fear and determination coexisted like twin flames. Tomorrow, she would meet with Mason again. They would press charges, face the system, and bring light to what had long been kept in darkness. And as she sat there in the flickering light, she whispered to herself, "If they think they can scare me, they've already forgotten who raised me." Rose's words echoed softly in her mind. Family holds even when it breaks. Maybe that was true. But tonight, Emily decided that family would no longer mean silence. It would mean justice. The studio lights were brighter than Emily had expected. She sat on a small stage, facing the host of Maple County's local morning program, the kind of show that usually discussed school fairs and weather updates. Today, though, the air felt heavier. A quiet tension pulsed beneath every word. Behind Emily, the screen displayed the title of her investigative feature, "The Hidden Bruises, Unseen Abuse in Our Elderly Communities." Her hands were folded on her lap. The silver bracelet, now returned to her after being released from evidence, rested gently on her wrist. It was no longer just a keepsake, it had become a symbol of resistance. "Emily Carter," the host began, his tone respectful but charged, "your report has shaken our viewers. You revealed not only your family's story, but a system that failed to protect your grandmother, and many others like her. Why did you decide to go public?" Emily inhaled deeply. "Because silence protects the wrong side. For too long, we've treated elder abuse as something shameful, something families should hide. But every bruise, every forged signature, every broken trust, it's a crime, not a private problem. My grandmother's story isn't rare. It's only that most victims don't have someone watching." The studio went still. Even the crew seemed to hold their breath. She continued, her voice steady despite the ache behind it. "I had to install a hidden camera to prove what was happening. That should never be necessary. No one should have to spy on their loved ones to keep them safe." The host nodded solemnly. "And now that your uncle and his sons are under investigation, what happens next?" Emily looked straight into the camera lens. "We fight for everyone who can't. We bring this conversation to every town, every home, every lawmaker's office. Elder abuse is not a family issue, it's a social epidemic." When the segment ended, the studio fell into a quiet hum of movement. The host thanked her, but Emily barely heard him. Her phone was already vibrating in her purse. By the time she reached her car, she had 37 missed calls and dozens of new emails. The subject lines blurred together as she scrolled. "My mother is scared. I think my aunt's caretaker is stealing. Please help me." By afternoon, her story had spread beyond Cedarfield. Calls poured in from across Vermont and even New Hampshire. Some came from adult children who suspected something was wrong at home. Others came from seniors themselves, voices trembling as they spoke into the phone, often saying the same words, "I didn't know who to tell." Emily spent the next 2 days answering as many as she could. Each story chipped at her heart. Retired teachers losing their savings to manipulative relatives, widowers isolated by caregivers who controlled every phone call, veterans coerced into signing over pensions. Detective Mason called her on the third night. "You started something big," he said. "I didn't mean to start anything," Emily replied softly. "I just wanted to keep one person safe." "That's how all movements begin," Mason said. "One person who refuses to stay quiet." They met at the police station the following morning. Mason had cleared out a corner office, setting up 2 desks and a whiteboard. On it, he had written a phrase in bold black marker, "Safe Hands Network." "This," he said, gesturing toward the board, "is what we build next." Emily stared at the words. "A community hotline?" "More than that," Mason said. "A network, a place where victims or their families can reach out, report anonymously, and get connected to verified legal and social services. You and I will coordinate it with the department's Elder Protection Unit. The press coverage gives us visibility, but we need structure, real protection. Emily felt a surge of purpose. We can train volunteers, retired nurses, teachers, even college students studying social work. They can make home visits, check in on seniors living alone. Mason smiled faintly. You think like a journalist, but also like an advocate. I like that. By the end of the week, the Safe Hands Network had a dedicated phone line, a website, and 3 local volunteers. A retired paramedic named Alice offered to coordinate calls during the night shift. The first few days were overwhelming. Emily barely slept. She spent her nights answering messages, reviewing reports, and meeting with Mason to triage urgent cases. Some calls ended in quiet gratitude, others ended with tears. One night, she listened to a trembling voice describe years of financial manipulation by a grandson who lived under the same roof. "Do you think anyone will believe me?" the woman asked. "Yes," Emily answered, her own voice breaking. "I believe you, and you're not alone anymore." Word of the network spread quickly. Local newspapers began running stories about it. Churches and community centers pinned up flyers. Within a month, Safe Hands Network had expanded to neighboring towns. Volunteers began organizing workshops to educate families about recognizing signs of coercion and neglect. One Saturday morning, Emily visited a senior community in Brattleboro to speak about the project. The hall was filled with people, some young, some gray-haired, all listening closely as she stood before them. "When my grandmother was hurt," Emily said, "she told me family holds even when it breaks. I used to think that meant forgiveness. Now I understand. It means accountability. It means standing up for each other, even when it's painful." The crowd was silent for a moment, then broke into applause. After the event, an elderly man approached her. His hands trembled as he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside was a silver cuff bracelet, dented and old. "My wife wore this for 40 years, he said quietly. "She passed away last winter. I never thought it meant anything until I heard your story. Maybe it's time I do something with it." Emily took the bracelet, feeling the cold weight of it in her palm. "You already have," she whispered. That evening, she walked home through the soft glow of streetlights, her heart both heavy and lifted. The night air smelled faintly of rain and peppermint from the tea shop down the street. She thought of Rose, safe now, reading letters at her bedside. The silver bracelet on Emily's wrist caught the light again, glimmering faintly like an unspoken vow. Her story had begun with one hidden camera in a quiet house. Now it had turned into a movement, a ripple of voices rising from towns that had once stayed silent. And as she sat down to draft her next article for the Boston Herald, she typed the closing line with steady hands. "If you believe no one should suffer in silence, share this story." Every voice raised is another light turned on in the dark. Outside, the town of Cedarfield slept, but this time, it was not a silence of ignorance. It was the calm after awakening, the kind of quiet that waits for dawn. The courthouse in Burlington rose from the gray morning like a stern reminder that truth has a place to stand. Reporters lined the steps. Volunteers from Safe Hands Network clustered near the entrance, their coats buttoned tight against a stubborn wind that smelled of lake water and rain. Inside, the air was dry and humming with whispers. Emily walked down the corridor with Detective Mason at her side, the weight of months resting between each step. Rose arrived moments later, assisted by a court aide. She wore a navy dress and a soft wool shawl. The silver bracelet, polished and whole, rested on her wrist like a quiet declaration. When she saw Emily, her face lit for a heartbeat. They clasped hands without words. Rose looked small, but her presence bent the noise of the hallway into a hush. The hearing room was crowded. The prosecutor spread files across the table. A bailiff called for order. Mark entered with his attorneys, followed by Tyler and Jason. Emily stared at them and saw not monsters, but men who had mistaken power for entitlement. Their faces held the heavy look of those who finally realized that consequences were not a rumor. Testimony began. The prosecutor guided the story patiently, brick by brick. The video footage played on a screen that seemed larger than life. Mark's voice filled the room, the grip on Rose's wrist, the bracelet striking the floor, the papers thrust forward. A few people flinched, as if the sound might somehow continue to echo inside them. Linda Hayes took the stand with hands still shaking. She admitted the money. She admitted the silence. She cried when she said Rose had asked her once if God forgave people who looked away. Emily watched the jury, how their expressions shifted, how they leaned forward when the timeline of threats and surveillance came into view. Financial records were introduced that connected payments to a private contractor. Phone logs mapped out the late-night calls. Messages appeared in printed form, stripped of their cowardly anonymity. Then, it was Rose's turn. The room stood when she entered the witness box. She swore the oath with a clear voice. The prosecutor approached gently, as if moving through sacred ground. "Mrs. Whitmore," he asked, "can you tell the court how you felt during those nights?" Rose folded her hands, the bracelet catching a pale shard of light. "I felt as if the walls had forgotten me, as if the house I loved no longer knew my name." Her eyes flicked to Mark. "I wanted to believe that my son had only lost his way, but fear leaves fingerprints. It bruises the body and the mind, and I was tired of getting smaller to make room for someone else's anger." A rustle moved through the room. Some shifted in their seats, others looked down. "Did you ever agree to transfer the house?" the prosecutor asked. "No," Rose said. "This is not only a house, it is the map of our lives." She paused. A pen should not be a weapon. When the defense cross-examined, they tried to suggest confusion, fragile memory, misunderstanding. Rose listened without flinching. Emily saw it then, the quiet steel that had been there all along. Sorrow had not erased it, age had not dulled it. The judge called a brief recess. Emily guided Rose back to a bench outside the courtroom and handed her a small thermos from her bag. Peppermint tea slipped into a paper cup, sending up a soft curl of steam. Rose cupped it between both palms. Her face loosened. For a moment they were simply grandmother and granddaughter in a hallway that held too many footsteps. "You are brave," Emily whispered. "So are you," Rose answered. "Bravery is only love with its sleeves rolled up." When they returned, closing arguments began. The prosecutor spoke of duty and trust. He spoke of a society that cannot call itself civilized if it cannot shield those who built it. He asked the jury to consider the difference between an inheritance and a theft. The defense followed with words about stress and family tension. They called it a misunderstanding that became a mess. The words felt like dust in a room that had seen the evidence. The judge broke for deliberation. The jury left. Time slowed to a stubborn crawl. The clock on the rear wall marked the seconds in measured taps. Emily sat with her hands folded, feeling the tiny pulse at her wrist. Mason leaned forward, elbows on his knees, a steady pillar in the storm they had all walked through. Mark stared at the table while his sons whispered to each other, fear arranging their faces into something finally honest. The jury returned in less than 3 hours. Everyone stood. The clerk read the findings with a voice that never broke. Guilty on elder abuse. Guilty on coercion. Guilty on attempted fraud. A ripple ran through the room, not loud, but wider than any sound. Sentencing followed. The judge spoke about the gravity of exploitation, about trust as a legal and moral cornerstone. He spoke about the nature of harm that does not always leave scars where the world can see them. Then he handed down the years. 7 to 12, depending on participation and prior record. Custody would begin at once. Emily did not cheer. Justice had no taste of victory. It simply allowed breath to return. The judge asked if the victim wished to address the court. Rose stood. The room stilled as if listening to an old song it had almost forgotten. "I forgive them," she said, her voice clear. "But I do not forget. No one has the right to turn a parent into fear. I hope they learn to live with truth. I hope they learn to make repair where repair is still possible." She let her gaze pass over her son and grandsons, then returned to the judge. I wish them a better ending than the one they tried to write for me." Silence spread, deep and respectful. When the session ended, people rose slowly, as if reluctant to break whatever had settled over the room. Outside, the air felt warmer. The sky had opened a little, a soft blue showing through the clouds. Volunteers from Safe Hands Network stood in a small circle, exchanging quiet hugs. Reporters spoke in low tones that would later become headlines and evening broadcasts. In the courthouse lobby, Emily handed Rose the paper cup once more. The tea had cooled, but the scent was still bright. Rose lifted it, not as a ritual of comfort, but as a small act of triumph. Her hands were steady. The bracelet flashed in the light like a single note held in a larger song. "Peppermint," Rose said. "Your grandfather always said it tasted like beginnings." Emily smiled. "Then let it be that." They walked out together into the Burlington afternoon. The steps felt different this time, lighter without losing their weight. Justice had not healed every wound, but it had closed the door through which fear had entered. In the distance, Lake Champlain gleamed under a thinning veil of cloud. The wind carried the smell of water and stone and autumn grass. Behind them, the courthouse stood quiet. Inside, files would be closed and sentences recorded. But the real work, Emily knew, waited beyond those walls. Calls would still come in. Stories would still surface. The network would keep growing, one voice at a time. As they reached the sidewalk, Rose slipped her arm into Emily's. The city moved around them without hurry. A cyclist passed, a taxi idled, a child laughed somewhere down the block. Life had refused to be rearranged by cruelty. It had simply kept going until it found a way to go better. Emily looked at her grandmother, at the cup lifted in a small salute to the day. The moment felt like a quiet coronation, not of victory, but of dignity reclaimed. They turned toward the car. The afternoon stretched ahead like a road that finally pointed home. A year had passed since the trial. The house in Cedarfield no longer felt haunted by silence or fear. The morning smelled of lavender and peppermint, and sunlight streamed through the curtains like forgiveness made visible. Emily often woke early now, not to work, but to walk through the garden with her grandmother. The old lilac bushes had bloomed again, their scent mingling with the new rows of lavender that lined the stone path. It was Nathan Brooks's idea. She had met Nathan at a conference in Burlington about the Elder Dignity Act. He had been one of the speakers, a community health advocate with a calm voice and the kind of eyes that listened before he spoke. When he talked about dignity and care for the aging, Emily felt something move inside her, something she hadn't felt since her mother's death, a sense that compassion could still be powerful. After the event, Nathan found her standing near the exit, lost in thought. "You were the journalist who wrote The Hidden Bruises, right?" he asked. Emily nodded, surprised. "You read it?" "It helped one of my patients find the courage to ask for help," he said. "So yes, I read it more than once." That was how it began. Coffee meetings became shared projects, and shared projects became long evenings on the porch, talking about what healing really meant. Nathan wasn't just kind to her, he was patient with Rose, too. He never treated her as fragile but as wise, asking her opinion on everything from herbal remedies to home care plans. One spring morning, Nathan arrived with a box of lavender seedlings. "This is for you, Mrs. Whitmore," he said with his usual easy smile. Rose looked at the plants with tenderness. "Lavender was Henry's favorite scent," she said softly. "He used to say it smelled like home." "Then we'll bring it back," Nathan replied. Together they knelt in the dirt behind the porch, the air filled with the promise of growth. Emily stood at the door watching, her heart full. From that day on, the garden became the family's sanctuary. Every morning, Rose would sit on the porch in her rocking chair, a cup of peppermint tea beside her, watching the lavender sway with the breeze. The silver bracelet caught the sunlight with every small movement of her hand. For the first time in years, her laughter returned, quiet, like the crackle of kindling catching fire after a long winter. Emily and Nathan's relationship deepened in the same gentle rhythm. He never rushed her. He understood that love born from pain needed time to trust itself. They spent weekends visiting rural health centers together, raising awareness about elder protection. And at night, they returned to Cedarfield, to Rose, to the scent of lavender drifting through the open windows. One evening in late summer, Nathan asked Rose for permission to take Emily out for dinner. Rose smiled knowingly. "As long as you bring her home with that same sparkle in her eyes," she said. Dinner turned into a walk by Lake Champlain. The air was cool, and fireflies danced along the edge of the water. Nathan stopped and turned to her. "You've spent so much of your life protecting others, Emily," he said quietly. "Let someone protect you for a change." Her throat tightened. "Are you sure you know what that means?" "I do," he said simply. Months later, under the maple trees that framed the Whitmore garden, they exchanged vows in a small ceremony. The chairs were arranged in a semicircle facing the porch, where Rose sat proudly in a pale lavender dress, the silver bracelet gleaming against her skin. The scent of flowers filled the air, mingling with the laughter of friends and the soft hum of the summer wind. When it was time for speeches, Rose stood with a little help from Emily. The crowd fell silent. Her voice trembled at first, then grew stronger, filled with the same quiet authority that had once comforted a frightened child. "Tin you," she began, then paused and switched to English, smiling at her granddaughter. "Love is not measured by time, but by how we protect one another." The garden hushed around her words. "I once thought growing old meant becoming invisible," she continued. "But today, I see that age does not fade love. It refines it. It teaches us what truly matters. To those who have loved, lost, and learned to love again, you are proof that healing is not a miracle, but a choice we make every day." Emily's eyes shimmered with tears. Nathan reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. Around them, guests wiped their eyes as the evening light softened into gold. Later, as music drifted through the yard and people began to dance, Rose returned to her rocking chair. The lavender behind her caught the glow of string lights, their scent rising with the night air. Emily approached her. "Thank you for today," she whispered. Rose smiled. "You're the one who gave me today, my dear." As the sun dipped below the horizon, its last light spilled across the porch, bathing them in warmth. Emily looked out at the garden her grandmother and husband had rebuilt together. The lavender swayed gently, whispering to the wind. In that moment, everything felt connected: the bruises that had faded, the courage that had taken root, and the love that continued to grow, steady and alive. The house that had once been a place of fear was now filled with light again, not just from the lamps or candles, but from the people who refused to give up on one another. And under that fading sunlight, Emily finally understood what Rose had always meant: that true healing is not about forgetting the pain, but about choosing to live beautifully in spite of it. 3 years had passed since that long summer evening when the lavender had first bloomed again behind Rose Whitmore's porch. The garden had grown wilder now, thick and fragrant, its color spilling across the yard like soft twilight. Emily often said that the lavender seemed to mirror her grandmother's strength, resilient, fragrant, and quietly enduring no matter how many storms passed. Life had found its rhythm. Emily and Nathan's little daughter, Lily, played in the yard with a red ball that always rolled into the lavender patch, making Rose laugh every time. Nathan had become the director of the Safe Hands Network, and Emily had turned her investigative work into advocacy journalism. Together, they had transformed one family's suffering into a movement that reached across Vermont and beyond. But on a quiet afternoon in early autumn, a letter arrived. It was simple, handwritten, and sealed with no return address. Emily knew the handwriting before she even opened it. "Mother, we would like to visit you. We seek forgiveness, not comfort." The words trembled on the page. For a moment, Emily felt old anger stir like dust unsettled by wind. She brought the letter to the porch, where Rose sat watching Lily chase butterflies among the lavender. "Grandma," she said softly, handing it to her. "It's from them." Rose took the envelope, her fingers steady despite her age. Her eyes moved slowly across the words, and when she finished, she let out a long breath that seemed to carry years of memory. "They want to come home," she said finally. Emily hesitated. "Do you want to see them?" Rose looked toward the horizon, where the sunlight was already beginning to turn amber. "I want to see if forgiveness still means peace," she said. The visit happened the following week. The day was overcast, the air cool and heavy with the scent of rain. Mark arrived first, thinner and older, his posture bent, but his eyes clearer than Emily remembered. Behind him were his two sons, both quiet, both carrying something heavy that had little to do with the bags in their hands. They stood on the path for a long moment before Rose appeared at the door. She wore a soft blue sweater and her silver bracelet, polished to a gentle shine. Emily stood behind her, silent but watchful. Mark's voice broke the stillness. "Mother, I know I don't deserve to be here, but I needed to tell you that I am sorry." Rose's face was calm, her eyes searching. "You hurt me, Mark. You took what was never yours to take, not just the house, but the trust that built it." "I know," he whispered. "Prison gave me time to understand what I became. I don't ask for a place here. I only ask for your forgiveness." Rose's gaze softened, but her voice remained steady. Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting, and it is not a key to this door. He looked down, tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. "I understand." She stepped forward, placing a hand on his arm. "I forgive you, my son, but I cannot let the past move back in. Some doors must stay closed so the light can stay inside." For a moment, no one spoke. The sound of wind through the lavender was the only thing between them. Then Mark nodded, turning away with a quiet dignity. His sons followed, their faces pale but relieved. After they disappeared down the road, Emily turned to her grandmother. "Was that hard?" she asked. Rose smiled faintly. "No harder than holding on to anger for too long. Letting go is the final act of love." That night, Emily sat at her desk, editing the final cut of her new video. She had titled it, "Houses with Light in the Night." On screen, the images moved slowly. Seniors in community homes, volunteers visiting them, families reunited after years of silence. Her voice, calm and steady, guided the story. 3 years ago, my grandmother's Bruises told a story that too many families still ignore. What began as fear turned into a call for change. "But healing," she said softly, "is not just about justice. It is about rebuilding the spaces where trust can live again." She paused, looking out the window. The lights in Rose's house glowed through the dark, steady and warm. Then she spoke her closing words. "If you are watching this and you have an elderly loved one, call them today. Do not wait to see bruises before you notice their pain. Sometimes the smallest act of care can change a life." Emily closed her laptop and walked to the kitchen. Rose was there, pouring 2 cups of tea. The air smelled of peppermint and rain. On the table beside the tray lay the silver bracelet, shining faintly under the light. "I kept it polished," Rose said, noticing Emily's gaze. "It reminds me of everything we survived." Emily smiled. "And everything we built after." They carried their tea to the porch. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean. Across the yard, the windows glowed softly through the mist, each house a small constellation in the darkness. Lily's laughter echoed from her room upstairs, high and bright, like the sound of a promise fulfilled. Rose lifted her cup, her hand trembling slightly but steady enough to hold warmth. "You know," she said, looking out at the quiet town, "I used to think safety was something others gave you. But it isn't. It's something you grow, one act of courage at a time." Emily nodded. "You taught me that." The wind stirred the lavender again, carrying its scent into the night. For a moment, the entire porch seemed to breathe. The light from the window touched the bracelet, making it gleam like a heartbeat. The teacups steamed gently, their warmth rising toward the stars. And in that small, golden house at the edge of Cedarfield, surrounded by the hum of life returning, the story of Rose Whitmore ended not in darkness, but in light. Because some homes, once broken by silence, learn how to shine again. Epilogue. A light that never fades. Every story leaves behind a trace, like the scent of lavender on a quiet morning. Rose's house still glows each night, its windows warm with the light of forgiveness, courage, and love that refuse to fade. What began as fear became a legacy of protection, reminding us that silence can be broken and healing can bloom in the most unexpected places. Emily's journey was not just her own. It belongs to every family that has faced loss, to every older heart that still beats with quiet strength, and to every soul brave enough to stand up for what is right. Because sometimes the strongest battles are fought not with anger, but with truth, tenderness, and persistence. If this story touched you, let it be more than just a story. Let it be a reflection of your own strength, your own voice, your own hope. Tell your story. Speak for someone who cannot. Reach out to the people you love before the silence grows too deep. Like this video if it moved you, share it so others may find courage in it. And subscribe to Grandma's Final Chapter to receive the next story of love, resilience, and renewal, because every ending we tell is a reminder that it is never too late to begin again.